There's a truth that more and more older Americans are realizing. America is becoming too expensive to grow old in. Rent is increasing. Medical costs are rising. Food prices are rising, while the average pension is not even enough to live a minimal life. So millions of people are looking beyond the United States. They dream of beachfront apartments in Mexico, the peaceful cafes in Thailand, a slow life in Portugal or Vietnam. And every year more and more people actually leave. But what shocked many people the most was not the culture shock, but the moment they realize their homeland has changed so much that they can no longer go back. This is not just a retirement story. This is a story of millions of Americans quietly leaving the system. There was a time when the American dream had a very clear ending. You work hard for several decades, pay off your mortgage, accumulate retirement savings, and then step into old age with a sense of security. No need to be rich, just enough to live with peace of mind and enough time to enjoy the final years of life. That used to be the formula that millions of Americans absolutely trusted. But the problem is that formula seems to no longer work. Nowadays, more and more older adults are discovering that retirement no longer resembles crossing the finish line. It's like trying to run a marathon on a treadmill that's constantly speeding up. Rent is increasing. Medical bills are increasing. Food prices are rising. Even the smallest things quietly become more expensive each year, as if someone is tightening the wallets of the entire middle class without anyone noticing. And here is the part that shocks many people the most. An average retired household in the U.S. currently spends about $5,000 a month, while the average Social Security benefit is only around $2,000. Just the rent for an average apartment already consumes about $1,500. That means even without eating, refueling, buying medicine, or turning on the air conditioning in the scorching Texas summer that feels like a giant pizza oven, many people are almost out of money. That's why more and more older Americans say they are no longer retired. They are just trying to survive with a more polite style. And the strange thing is that this crisis is happening very quietly. There are no scenes of chaos on the streets. There are no long lines of protesters. Only millions of people are quietly cutting back on their lives little by little. Cancel the trip. Cancel the dental appointment. Postpone the hospital appointment. Choose cheaper food. Or worse, go back to work at an age when they should be resting. Have you noticed that more and more gray-haired people are appearing at Walmart counters, supermarkets, or delivery apps? That's not the inspiring act of aging like in the ads. For many people, it's simply that the pension isn't enough to live on. And then there's another issue that few people talk about: loneliness. In the past, retirement was often associated with a large family, a stable community, and neighbors who had known each other for decades. But modern America is becoming increasingly expensive and fragmented. Children move to different states to live. Friends grow old or pass away. The neighborhoods that were once full of life are now changing so rapidly that many people feel like they are living in a place that is both familiar and strange. Perhaps that is the saddest part of the whole story. It's not just about losing money, but rather the feeling of losing a future they once thought they would surely have. And it was at that moment that an idea began to emerge in the minds of millions of Americans. If we can't afford to grow old in America, then why not grow old somewhere else? And that's when everything started to take a completely different turn. After many years of watching bills rise faster than savings, many Americans began looking beyond their national borders, not as tourists, but as people seeking an escape. That's why videos like How I Retired in Thailand on $2,000 a month or My New Life in Portugal suddenly exploded all over YouTube. For millions of people, those videos are no longer just entertainment. They are like a slightly open door leading to another life where old age no longer feels like being charged for every breath. And to be honest, that fantasy is extremely appealing. A small condo near the beach in Mexico rents for less than an old apartment in Florida. A full meal in Vietnam is sometimes cheaper than a Starbucks drink in California. Even in some places in Thailand or Portugal, many people say they live comfortably on about $2,000 a month, an amount that in the U.S. sometimes is only enough to cover rent and buy a few eggs during inflation. It sounds a bit like a joke, but there have been times when the American internet seriously debated whether eggs were becoming a luxury item. And then comes the part that shocks many people even more. Healthcare. For many older Americans, hospitals in the U.S. resemble a strange casino where you never know what the final bill will be until you walk out the door. Meanwhile, in many other countries, the cost of a doctor's visit is so low it sounds like a typo. There's a saying that many expats joke about. In some countries, seeing a doctor is cheaper than parking at a hospital in the US. Sounds funny, but it's that bitter humor that makes many people start seriously considering leaving. But what really pulls people away is not just money. It's a feeling of life elsewhere. Lighter, slower, easier to breathe. In many famous expat cities, people walk more, sit in cafes longer, and talk more with their neighbors. Not every place is perfect, of course, but many Americans say that for the first time in years, they feel like they are no longer living in a state of constant tension. And that's a very interesting insight. Many people don't just want to live cheaper. They want to feel like they are still alive. And then there's something even harder to talk about, but it has a huge impact. Mental fatigue. After many years of living amidst economic pressure, political disputes, 24/7 negative news, and an increasingly polarized society, many people are starting to imagine a place where life is simpler. Not paradise, just a place where they can wake up without feeling like their minds are being punched in the face by the internet as soon as they open their eyes. And notably, recent surveys show that dissatisfaction with the current political and social environment is becoming one of the biggest reasons why Americans are considering retiring abroad. From a distance, it all looks like quite a perfect dream. Lower costs, cheaper healthcare, better climate, slower life. Many people even say they found the community and sense of belonging they had long lost in the US. But something very interesting starts to happen after a few years of living abroad. And almost no one talks about it in those sunny vlogs with cocktails by the beach. Because sometimes the hardest thing is not leaving America, but realizing that one day you might not be able to return anymore. But then after the beautiful filter of retire abroad videos, after the cheap meals, the sunny beaches, and the initial feeling of freedom, many Americans began to face something they were completely unprepared for. Not culture shock, not the food, not the language, but a much stranger feeling. The feeling of gradually becoming someone who no longer belongs anywhere. There was an expat living in the Philippines for nearly 10 years who once said something very haunting. You leave America for a few years, and then one day you suddenly realize there's nothing left to go back to. And the scary thing is that it often happens very slowly. So slowly that many people don't realize it until it's too late. Old friends move to another state. A few people pass away. The familiar neighborhoods change. Relationships gradually unravel like rubber bands stretched too long. One day, the homeland no longer feels like a place to return to. It becomes a memory. It creates a very strange psychological twist. At first, many people thought they would only try it for a few years. But time abroad has a strange way of swallowing your old history. And then when thinking about returning to the US, they begin to realize a painful truth. There are no more slots with their names on them there. No old community. No old rhythm of life. No feeling of belonging. Have you ever felt that a place you once knew very well suddenly became unfamiliar? For many older expats, that is exactly the feeling when thinking about the United States. But this is the part that very few travel vlogs like to mention. Money abroad sometimes resembles a maze of paperwork more than a tropical dream. Many people move abroad to simplify their lives only to end up buried under tax forms that sound like robot names from a sci-fi movie. FATCA, foreign account reporting requirements. As long as your bank account abroad exceeds $10,000 at any time during the year, you may have to report it to the U.S. Department of the Treasury. And honestly, just rent, food expenses, and a little emergency savings can easily cross that threshold. The irony is that many foreign banks even hesitate to serve American citizens out of fear of legal complications. You spend your whole life working in the U.S., imagine how strange paying taxes in the U.S., and then when you go abroad to open a bank account, people look at you as if you just brought a suitcase full of paperwork. Some expats recount that their American bank accounts were closed with almost no warning simply because they changed their address to abroad. Some financial companies do not even allow individuals with foreign addresses to continue holding IRAs or 401ks. And that is the moment many people realize. You are not just moving countries. You are leaving behind your entire familiar financial system. But if paperwork only causes headaches, then healthcare is what truly keeps many people awake at 2 a.m. Because Medicare almost never follows you abroad. When you're still healthy, this doesn't sound too serious. But old age is an annoying habit. Unexpected things happen. A fall, a heart attack, a terrifying night where breathing suddenly becomes difficult. And it is at moments like that when many expats begin to clearly feel the fragility of aging in a place that is not their homeland. There is a very true saying about expat life. You can save a lot of money abroad until the day something happens. And the scariest part is that many people living in countries with good healthcare systems still feel uneasy simply because they don't fully understand how those systems work. Imagine being 74 years old, lying in a hospital where everyone speaks a language you don't completely understand. Just imagining it is enough to make many people start missing America again, even though they themselves once wanted to leave it. But perhaps the hardest part is not money or hospitals. It's loneliness. Because when you're young, moving to another country sounds like an adventure. But when you're old, sometimes it feels like standing between two worlds without fully belonging to either. The children are halfway around the world. Time zones are different. The holidays come and go in an apartment slightly quieter than usual. You FaceTime your family for a few minutes. Then the screen goes dark and the room becomes silent again. That is something many people don't anticipate. What they were truly searching for may never have been cheaper rent. It may have been the feeling of belonging somewhere. And sometimes the longer you live abroad, the more you realize that belonging is the hardest thing to buy in the world, even if you live in a tropical paradise for $1,500 a month. But the interesting thing is this. Despite knowing all those difficulties, more and more Americans still dream about leaving. And that raises the next big question. If expat life is so complicated, why do millions of people still want it so badly? This is perhaps the most interesting paradox of the entire retire abroad trend. According to recent surveys, about 44% of Americans say they have seriously considered retiring abroad. But the number of people actually receiving Social Security at addresses outside the United States is only around 700,000, less than 1% of total beneficiaries. In other words, millions dream of leaving. Most end up staying. And the question is, why? Partly because dreaming is always easier than moving your entire life to another country. Watching a vlog about retiring in Thailand while sitting on the sofa in a freezing apartment in Ohio is one thing. Selling your house, handling immigration paperwork, transferring financial systems, and learning to live in a new place at the age of 70 is a completely different story. The expat dream sometimes resembles seeing a beautiful island from afar. Looking at it is wonderful, but whether you can actually swim, there's another matter entirely. And perhaps the most unsettling part of this entire trend is that it is not only happening to retirees anymore. More and more young Americans are quietly asking the exact same question. If life already feels this expensive now, what will happen when we are old? That fear is slowly reshaping how an entire generation thinks about work, money, and even the meaning of success itself. In the past, people often imagine retirement as a reward waiting at the end of decades of hard work. But today, many younger workers no longer feel certain that reward will ever arrive. Some openly admit they don't expect to own a home. Others joke online that retirement is just a myth invented by older generations. Sounds dramatic. But behind the humor is a very real anxiety, because when housing prices rise faster than salaries, when healthcare feels unpredictable, when inflation quietly eats away savings year after year, people stop planning for comfort. They start planning for survival. And that may explain why the idea of leaving one's country no longer feels shocking to many Americans. For a growing number of people, mobility itself has become the backup retirement plan. Go where life is affordable. Go where stress feels lower. Go where time still feels human. That is a very different version of the American dream than the one previous generations imagined. But there's another side to this story that rarely appears in statistics. Not everyone who leaves is unhappy with America. Some people simply discover that distance changes perspective. Living abroad often makes people realize how unusual certain parts of American life actually are. The constant rush, the obsession with productivity, the feeling that resting too much somehow means falling behind. Many expats say the biggest culture shock was not adapting to another country, but realizing how tense they had been for years without noticing it. For the first time, they sit in a cafe without feeling guilty for wasting time. They walk through neighborhoods where people still talk to strangers. They notice elderly people outside, not isolated indoors, but participating in daily life. And suddenly a difficult question appears in their minds. Was life always supposed to feel this exhausting? That question is becoming increasingly common all over the developed world, because this story is not really only about Americans. Many Europeans, Canadians, Koreans, and Japanese are beginning to face similar fears about aging, isolation, and affordability. The modern world became incredibly efficient, but somewhere along the way, many people feel it also became emotionally exhausting. And perhaps that is why videos about slow living, small towns, simple lifestyles, and retiring abroad continue exploding online. People are not just searching for cheaper places. They are searching for a version of life that